Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for May 4th, 2025. Today, we're talking with Dr. Benyamin Poghosyan, who is a senior fellow at APRI Armenia in Yerevan. He's also the chairman of the Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies.
And just a reminder, we are actually recording this on May 6th, but we covered the events of the previous week that ended on May 4th. So that's how we date our shows, quickly as a reminder. And before we bring in Benjamin, please find us on social media and subscribe to us. Like, share, and comment on our podcast on whatever platform, especially YouTube, that you listen to. And even better, become a sustaining member by going to podcasts.groong.org/donate and become a Patreon sponsor, or you can get us buy me a coffee. We really appreciate anything you do to help us, and it helps keep the light on. So thank you very much in advance. Okay, on to the show.
Hello, Benjamin. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Asmed.
Welcome,
Hello,
Benjamin.
Hovik. Thanks for having me, Bochun, and it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, indeed. Pleasure is all ours. So, as always, Benjamin, Donald Trump is once again turning up the heat on Iran. He's agitating. In a Sunday interview with NBC, he doubled down on demands for the complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear program. This is a move pushed hard by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his allies in Washington, D.C. At the same time, diplomatic efforts have hit a snag because, as we heard from Iran's top negotiator, Abbas Araghchi, he said that nuclear talks, which were set for Saturday, a couple of days ago, May 3rd, in Oman, were postponed due to technical reasons. We don't know what those are. No new date has been set yet, although Axios reports that a quieter, more back-channel meeting may happen later this week. The news about the postponement coincided with an angry post by Trump on Truth Social announcing the rollout of new secondary sanctions targeting Iranian oil to further tighten the screws on Tehran's economy. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., in a dramatic personnel shakeup, Trump booted his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, shipping him off to the UN. Actually, the word is that Waltz was apparently coordinating behind the scenes with Netanyahu on a potential strike against Iran. So can you tell us what is the trajectory of the US-Iran negotiations? And is the goal to reach an agreement or to not reach an agreement and initiate war against Iran?
Okay, as we call it in politics, not only in politics, it's probably like a $1 billion question, but I will try to share my assessments. So I think that Trump really wants to reach a deal, but the deal which Trump understands, or the terms of the deal, probably are not acceptable by Iran, which itself wants to reach a deal. So it's like a very paradoxical situation. I don't believe that Iran really wants to be struck by US or Israel, and I don't believe that Trump is really dreaming about starting a big war against Iran, because I think he have at least intuition, if not enough knowledge, that attack against Iran may quickly turn it into another nightmare as was Iraq's occupation of 2003, even if there will be no ground operation. So I think instinctively, Trump will do everything to avoid the war, but simultaneously, he wants a deal which conditions or part of these conditions are not acceptable by Iran. Yes, so now Trump says that there should be 100% dismantling of Iran's nuclear project or program, while Iran is telling that the right of uranium enrichment, at least to some level, I believe in 2015, the deal was reached about uranium enrichment for like 3 point something percentage. And Iran is telling that this is an absolute right of Iran, and Iran will never drop this right. Plus, there are some talks or rumors that also the United States wants to put restrictions or completely dismantle also Iranian's ballistic missile program.
That's right.
While Iran's position is very clear. These negotiations are about nuclear weapons or nuclear issues. We should not mix everything in one pot. And the same position Iran had also in 2015, because initially also there were a lot of talks that maybe 2015 deal will include something about Iranian missile program, something about Iranian so-called malign activities in the Middle East, these proxy forces and etc. So as of now, what US understands under the deal is absolutely not acceptable for Iran, and probably what Iran understands under the deal is absolutely not acceptable for the United States. Interestingly, I guess the same situation is on Russia-Ukraine negotiations. What Russia perceives as a minimum acceptable demand or conditions for Russia, these conditions are perceived as a complete capitulation by Ukraine. And what Ukraine understands as a minimally accepted conditions for Ukraine are perceived as an absolute non-starter for Russia. So in this case, at the end of the day, we have two options. Either negotiations will fail, or one side should somehow make concessions or at least backtrack from its regional vision.
Actually, that is the gist of the question. Are the sides actually so far apart? Are they starting at the extremes in order to make enough concessions to come to the middle, or are they essentially designed so that the negotiations fail?
Okay, usually it's a negotiations tactic when you start from your maximalistic positions and then starting to backtrack a little bit. But the key question is that what this little bit means. So as of now, I'm not very much optimistic that either Iran or the United States will do those concessions or those backpedaling, which will allow sides to reach a deal. But also, I don't think that it means that we are very close to some sort of military escalation because these negotiations may continue for months. Like initially, before elections, Trump was telling that I would finish Ukraine war within 24 hours. Then, after coming to Oval Office, he said I will finish the Ukraine war within 100 days. Now he says that maybe it will be another 100 days, or maybe there will be no deal. So I would bet, at least for the next few months, and I'm not in a position to say what may happen like within 1 year, because it's very complex, complicated, and we lack many details to have any assessment, fact-based or research-driven assessments. But I would bet that for the next few months, these negotiations may continue, but without too much success. Then what will happen, for example, starting from end of summer 2025, it's difficult to assess.
Benjamin, you mentioned, summer, and there were some reports in New York Times first that Israel was going to try to attack Iran, maybe independent of these negotiations. Then I believe there was another report in the New York Times that this attack or the war essentially has been postponed until October of this year. What is your reading on that? And also, Benjamin Netanyahu was scheduled to visit Baku, and it's a 5-day visit. I haven't seen a state visit for 5 days. He was supposed to be there next week, or May 9th, sorry, later this week, and then it got called off. So can you tell us, can you read anything about that?
On Netanyahu visit to Azerbaijan, I believe the primary goal for the visit was negotiations with Turkish President Erdogan, who was supposed to go to Azerbaijan on May 10, or maybe he still will go on May 10, but the key was to organize these negotiations, trying to de-escalate in Syria, and probably also to have other discussions. But currently, the hot topic between Israel and Turkey is Syria, because they are very close to conflicting situation in Syria, because Israel is bombing Syria, and Turkey is telling that it will not allow Israel to violate Syria's sovereignty, etc., etc. My understanding is that there were some preliminary agreements which supposed to be confirmed during leaders' meeting. I mean, Netanyahu and Erdogan. But for whatever reasons, probably at the last moment, either Netanyahu or Erdogan decided to leave negotiations or not to sign this deal or not to confirm this deal. And then for Netanyahu, there was no sense in this complex and complicated moment to go to Azerbaijan for 5 days or for any days if there is not going to be any meeting and any deal with Turkey via bilateral meeting with Erdogan. So this is my reading why Netanyahu's visit to Azerbaijan was postponed. Regarding what may Israel do, of course, like Israel is a sort of unpredictable actor, but my understanding is that only Israel is not in a position to significantly harm Iran's nuclear program. I mean, significantly, which will postpone Iran's nuclear program for at least 1 year or maybe more. Yes, of course, yes, without US involvement. Of course, they can use some bunker busting bombs or different technologies, but again, only Israel is not able to significantly harm Iran's nuclear program. This is my understanding. So I don't see many such a logic. Okay, Israel will do something, Iran will retaliate. We saw this type of things in 2024 two times. Like Iran launched missiles, Israel retaliated, but it did not have a significant impact on Iran. So without US, yes, Netanyahu may do this, probably also for some domestic political reasons, because war in Gaza is not as successful. And just recently, Netanyahu stated that the war will be expanded. And we all know that Netanyahu has a lot of domestic political problems and even legal problems. And he's using this emergency situation or the war to postpone his own trial. And he's accused of different corruption charges. So it's uh, theoretically, yes, Israel may try to strike Iran, mostly probably for domestic political reasons, trying to complicate situation even more. But to hope that without the US involvement, Israel is in a position to significantly harm or damage Iran's nuclear position, I don't think so.
Benjamin, could the secondary oil sanctions on Iran affect it significantly? Because, China is a major importer of Iranian oil. And also, how can it affect Armenia?
How can it affect Armenia? So what Armenia is buying from Iran, okay, a few things, but key probably A is natural gas, but this is for like swap scheme. We are importing natural gas and exporting electricity. I'm even not sure that this will be under sanctions or under tariffs, but let's see. Second, this is a LPG, liquid petroleum gas, and some cars in Armenia are using CNG and some are using LPG, but also Armenia imports LPG from Russia. So again, it's not a critical. Like even if in theory this LPG import from Iran will be halted, it's not critical. And also, I believe we are importing some diesel from Iran, but again, also we are importing the same from Russia or maybe from other European countries via Georgia, Black Sea. So I don't think that even if Armenia will be forced somehow to stop this gas for electricity scheme and also will be forced. Also, I don't believe that everything will be such serious for Armenia, which is like tiny thing in this Iranian trade. But even if Armenia is forced to stop importing LPG from Iran, diesel from Iran, and natural gas from Iran, and exporting electricity to Iran, I don't believe this will have any like major negative implications for Armenia's economy.
You mentioned the discussion over Ukraine a little bit earlier. How do the US-Russia talks affect the US-Iran situation?
There was a leakage which was somehow confirmed by Russia that initially President Trump asked President Putin to mediate between US and Iran, but then we never heard anything about Russia's mediation. Of course, if there is a complete clandestine mediation about which we know anything. Also, probably US would like to somehow drive a wedge between Russia and Iran, and also this could be a part of US-Russia negotiations. That okay, is a part of bigger package which will include not only Ukraine but probably US-Russia business relations, probably also European security. Also, they discuss Middle East, which means also Iran. But at the end of the day, the core issue is Ukraine. I don't believe that without reaching anything on Ukraine, United States and Russia are able to reach significant agreements on any other issues, including Middle East and including Iran. And because negotiations over Ukraine is somehow stalled, and there's no understanding where they can go, so I believe that somehow I don't see any immediate possibility for US and Russia coming on agreement on something on Iran. As far as again, there is nothing on Ukraine.
Right. Benjamin, I think you were in the process of answering the previous question, and so about the oil sanctions. So I want to continue from there. We know that the number one, I mean, one of the major sources for China's import oil is Iran. And many analysts predict that these secondary oil sanctions are targeted against China. And we know that there's a big trade war going between, or sanctions war, or tariff war going on between the United States and um, in China. So I want you to address that, but also let me ask the other question because I think, well, it's at least tangentially. 10 days ago, there was a massive blast at the Shahid Rajai port in Bandar Abbas in south of Iran. This is a critical point for the north-south trade corridor, the International North-South Trade Corridor, INSTIC, and it handles 80% of Iran's container traffic. So it seems to be a weird coincidence that all of these actions are happening and they affect Chinese economic relations between Iran. And then we have seen more explosions in cities like Mashhad, Qom, and Karaj in the subsequent days. What are your thoughts about, first of all, China as a big elephant in this room, and also the explosions in general? Are they accidents? Are they warnings? Are they terrorist attacks?
On blasts, of course, like every option has a right for life, as we say. And of course, anyone can believe on anything. If you don't have facts, it's becoming a little bit like a religion. You believe or not. But usually, I personally don't believe in too much coincidences in geopolitics. Of course, I do not have any facts to argue that this was not some mistake or result of some person doing wrong things during wrong time and in wrong places. But also, what I understood from blasts, I don't exclude that the key goal of the blast was to damage the fuel for Iranian missiles. Because, for example, during October Israel attacks against Iran, they mostly targeted the depots with fuels for missiles. And from Israeli perspective, okay, you may have many missiles, but if you don't have enough fuel for missiles, and there is a special fuel, like you cannot use gasoline or diesel simply to fly these ballistic missiles for 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers. And when I saw the photos of the blasts resulted by Israeli actions against Iran, and then the photos or videos or footage of the blast, including the color of the smoke or whatever, it seems that some missile fuel depots were blown up in this port. Again, this is like my understanding, and it could be wrong, but if my perception is right, then it means that the likelihood that this simply was like a terrible or unfortunate accident, the likelihood is becoming lower and lower. Because again, I had a perception that significant part of Iranian missile fuel was blown up during what we saw in the port. Regarding China, of course, China is a major buyer of Iranian oil, and definitely these secondary sanctions on oil can be part of US-China tariff war or trade war. But as far as there is no deal between US and China, I would be extremely surprised if, for example, China will stop buying Iranian oil. But I don't exclude that not buying Iranian oil can be part of this big package of US-China deal. Of course, if this deal is going to be reached, because we even don't know negotiations are on the way or not. Like President Trump stated several times that President Xi called him. This was officially refuted and rejected by Chinese side. Then very recently, US trade representative stated that there are no negotiations between the United States and China on trade. But again, I don't exclude that if, again, big if, US and China may reach a deal on trade, some big package or great bargain, then Iran or China-Iran economic relations can be part of this deal. But still, these discussions can be more realistic if a deal is reached between the United States and China.
Benjamin, last week, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian took a large delegation to Baku for extensive discussions. Azerbaijan reiterated its demands for extraterritorial corridors through Armenia. And Iran reiterated its policy of territorial integrity and violability of sovereign borders for all the countries in the region. What were the notable outcomes for you from these bilateral discussions?
Okay, first, I don't believe that issues related to Armenia or issues related to Zangezur corridor are number one priority between Iran and Azerbaijan. Yes, this is important for Iran. Iran does not want to be encircled by Turkic belt, given also this 20, 25 million Azeri-speaking population in northern provinces of Iran. But key in Iran-Azerbaijan relations is Israel or Azerbaijan's agreement or consent to provide its territory for different type of anti-Iranian activities for Israel. And I think Iran knows this, Azerbaijan knows this, but also Iran thinks that the best way somehow to contain these anti-Iranian activities in Azerbaijan by Israel, or at least be able to somehow force or influence Azerbaijani thinking, is not cutting all ties, but instead is deepening ties. So my understanding is that key reason behind Iran reaching out to Azerbaijan is trying to create additional channels, maybe additional economic dependencies, at the end of the day to get more leverages on Azerbaijan so that Azerbaijan is not going to cross some red lines from Iranian perspective regarding Israel's usage of Azerbaijani territory and Azerbaijani other resources against Iran. Again, all understands that in Israel-Iran fight or conflict, Azerbaijan is fully on Israel's side. Iran knows that, Azerbaijan knows that, Israel knows that. But again, probably I think Iran thinks that it's better to have contacts, relations, discussions, economic relations with Azerbaijan, thinking that this will somehow give Iran more potential or more possibilities to somehow force or shape Azerbaijani thinking and at least restrict what Israel is doing against Iran using Azerbaijan. I think this is number one issue between Iran and Azerbaijan. And then there are other issues, including the establishment of Zangezur corridor, which again, it's very clear, it's very simple. I don't think you need to be genius in geopolitics. You should know like a basic geography and also the basic facts about Iran history and Iran relations in South Caucasus to understand that Zangezur corridor and or any territory in Armenia which will connect Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan under Azerbaijani control, this is very, very bad for Iran. And of course, Iran will deliver this message that this is unacceptable for me. But from another point, I am not sure also that if Azerbaijan decides to launch large-scale hostilities to open the corridor, it 100% guarantees the military intervention by Iran. Of course not. So this is a very delicate balance when everything is covered by strategic ambiguity. So Azerbaijan does not know where Iran intervene militarily if there is a large-scale attack against Armenia to open the Zangezur corridor. But even this strategic ambiguity is a factor of deterrence, because even if there is a like I don't know 25% of chance or even 10% of chance that Iran may intervene militarily, and this will be either complete catastrophe for Azerbaijan or will result in a regional war between Turkey and Iran. Even this 10% chance and this strategic ambiguity, I think it's a deterring factor against Azerbaijani take against Armenia.
Several months ago, Azerbaijan started spreading these fake news that Armenia was firing on the border. Of course, we all know that this was being instigated by Azerbaijan. And I'm not sure if those firings have decreased in frequency or they have died down completely or we've become desensitized to it. So it's like a normal part of the normal thing. But on the issue of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, I haven't heard new things in terms of the talks or anything else. While Pashinyan's circles continue to confirm their commitment to peace, and even despite all these attacks, they're saying that our agenda is to negotiate and achieve a peace deal. The focus in Armenia is on domestic preparations for the 2026 elections, and we're seeing Azerbaijan very busy in terms of partnerships and bilateral relations with China, discussions with Iran, Turkey, Israel. What do you attribute this current lull in the Armenia-Azerbaijan talks? Is Azerbaijan simply busy, or is Aliyev giving Pashinyan some time? What can we expect in the coming weeks and months in terms of the Armenian Azerbaijani side of things?
Okay, I think it's more or less clear for everyone that talks were going to nowhere. This was clear also in 2024, and it's clear now. But I will be extremely surprised if ruling party now will state that the peace agenda failed, because just 1 year after 2026 parliamentary elections, to confess that is a key pillar of your foreign policy failed, probably is not the smart move. So definitely we will hear more and more statements that the process has not been failed, that there are some sort of advancements, that okay, at least we agreed on a text of the peace agreement. But again, I don't believe that anyone thinks that we are going to have Armenia-Azerbaijan peace agreement signed. It's clear that Azerbaijan always will do everything to keep the window open for any sort of military escalation against Armenia. And signature of peace agreement will give nothing to Azerbaijan, but theoretically may a little bit close this window. I'm telling a little bit because again, I hope no one believes that any peace agreement will make likelihood of Azerbaijani attack 0%, but it will decrease likelihood of this escalation. So from Azerbaijani point of view, it's a quite logical not to sign peace agreement. Like why Azerbaijan should sign peace agreement? And when I'm speaking with different experts, Armenian, Azerbaijani, even international experts, no one is able to give one single reasonable explanation why Azerbaijan should sign this peace agreement, regardless of its content. It's a framework agreement, semi-framework agreement, whatever is it. There is a zero logical explanation or reasonable explanation why Azerbaijan should sign peace agreement with Armenia, while there are a lot of reasonable explanations why Azerbaijan should not sign peace agreement with Armenia. So again, never say never, but I will be again extremely surprised if we are going to have Armenia-Azerbaijan peace agreement signed at least for the next 1 year, which automatically means at least until parliamentary elections of 2026. Regarding is Aliyev giving Pashinyan time, but time for what? Because what Azerbaijan demands is not only fully depend on Pashinyan or on Armenia. Yes, Armenia may agree and Armenia may apply to OSCE to dissolve Minsk group. Yes, Armenia may apply, but Armenia is not in a position to make this decision alone. You need all members of OSCE to vote for this decision. And even single country can veto, and Minsk group will be there. And Azerbaijani precondition is not that Armenia should apply to the OSCE to dissolve Minsk group. Azerbaijani precondition is Minsk group should be dissolved. But this is precondition, or this is the issue, which does not depend on Armenia only. I would say it depends little on Armenia. Second, Armenia should have constitution with no reference to the Declaration of Independence. Yes, recently, I believe, Prime Minister publicly stated that he believes that new constitution should not have any reference to the Declaration of Independence for whatever reasons, because Prime Minister thought that this Declaration of Independence is threat to our statehood or whatever. But again, the new constitution should be adopted through referendum. And no one can provide 100% guarantees to Azerbaijan that enough quantity of citizens of Armenia will vote for this new text, which de facto is being preliminary approved or reviewed by Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan is putting preconditions in front of Armenian government, which are out of control of Armenian government. It's not like the Azerbaijani government say, okay, Armenian government should issue this decision, which is fully within the authorities of Armenian government, and then I'm signing peace agreement. In this case, yes, we may say, okay, Armenian government should adopt this decision, and then peace agreement is signed. No. And plus, as I mentioned many times, there are these two boxes. One box preconditions, and there is a other box, so-called other demands. Establishment of Zangezur corridor, establishment of Western Azerbaijan, I don't know, recognition of Khojaly as a genocide, enclaves, and a lot of other demands. So if, let's assume in theory, we have a situation when all states of OSCE agrees to dissolve OSCE Minsk group, and then citizens of Armenia voted for constitution which has no reference to the Declaration of Independence. In this case, the box of preconditions will be empty. Now we have two balls will disappear. But who can guarantee that President Aliyev will not take one ball from the second box, which called other demands? Let's say ball establishment of Western Azerbaijan or ball establishment of Zangezur corridor. He may simply take the ball from the box called other demands and put it in the box called preconditions and say that, sorry guys, I am very happy that you accepted and realized these two preconditions that Armenian citizens voted for this new constitution without any reference to the Declaration of Independence. And I am happy that all OSCE member states agreed that Minsk group should be dissolved. But sorry, guys, now there is another ball in the box called preconditions. And this ball is, I don't know. Again, it could be either establishment of Zangezur corridor or, for example, establishment of Western Azerbaijan or bringing 300,000 or whatever Azerbaijanis into Armenia. So again, as far as there is no reason for Azerbaijan to sign peace agreement, Azerbaijan will not sign it, because if there is no reason for Azerbaijan, then Azerbaijan will sign only under pressure. But Armenia is not in a position to pressure Azerbaijan on anything. And then as international actor, especially in this complex and complicated regional and global geopolitics, when everything being shifted, no one has significant interest to spend resources and put significant pressure on President Aliyev for President Aliyev to sign some piece of paper, which again gives me the ground to argue that likelihood of signing peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the next 12 months is significantly low. Again, never say never.
Okay, let me turn our attention to May 9, when Moscow is going to hold some the Victory Day parades commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's triumph over Nazi Germany. While it's always a major event in Russia, this year it's notable for the large number of prominent international leaders who will be attending, including President Xi of China. Leaders of several countries aspiring for EU membership were also announced to be going, including Robert Fico of Slovakia, Alexander Vučić of Serbia, and even Armenia has announced that Nikol Pashinyan will be in attendance. That is, unless he catches COVID like he did last year, and like Alen Simonian hinted at earlier today. Speaking of catching COVID, rumors have been circulating that Fico and Vučić are having some health issues. This is very similar to old Soviet days, fueling speculation that they may bow out of going to Moscow. This is amidst threats from EU officials that the visits to Moscow will have consequences. So the question is Pashinyan going to go to Moscow? What is at stake for Armenia in deciding whether or not to go? And also, what are the politics? Can you talk a little bit about the politics of attending Victory Day, especially in the current atmosphere of multipolar geopolitics?
Look, in the last 36 months, like 2.5 years, Armenia was actively adapting itself to the South Caucasus, free of Russia, or at least adapting itself for the South Caucasus with significantly less presence of Russia. And this was based on the assumptions and on the assessments, mostly by the Western expert intelligence and any other community, that Russia is going to be defeated in Ukraine, and Russia will have huge internal and external problems, and Russia will forget about South Caucasus. So the message was clear. Dear Armenia, you have been more or less under Russian control or under Russian influence for the last 200 years. Okay, starting from 1827, when Russian troops entered Yerevan, which was then a part of Persian Empire. So first time for 200 years, or a little bit less than 200 years, South Caucasus will see less Russia or maybe zero Russia. So please adapt yourself. And Armenia was actively adapting, also significantly increasing its interactions with the West, also issuing some anti-Russian rhetoric, like telling that Russia is threat to Armenia's security, I don't know, military base is threat to Armenia's security, CSTO is threat to Armenia's security. etc., etc. And the idea probably behind these activities was very simple. If there will be no Russia in South Caucasus, while we see more aggressive and more assertive Azerbaijan, fully backed by Turkey, then probably who can stop Azerbaijan and Turkey from destroying Armenia itself? Just let's forget about Nagorno-Karabakh. Now let's think how we can save Armenia. And probably the idea was that if there is a no Russia, the only way to stop Azerbaijan and probably also Turkey from destroying completely Armenia itself is to have better relations with the West, hoping that A, West will prevent destruction of Armenia, B, West will convince or force President Aliyev to sign peace agreement with Armenia, C, West will convince or force President Erdogan to open Armenia-Turkey border, which will bring economic investments, money, and the living standards of population will grow up, which then will, of course, help the ruling party to also keep power. D, that maybe the West will somehow prevent ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, convincing Aliyev to tolerate the existence of Armenians without any status, without anything. So Armenia was doing this in the last 36 months. But starting from 2024, it gradually, its doubts starting to rise globally and also inside Armenia, that maybe Russia is not going to be defeated in Ukraine, which means that probably we are not going to live in Russia-free South Caucasus, which itself means that you have to take into account also Russia's interest. You cannot simply say, okay, I deleted Russia from equation, from geopolitical equation of South Caucasus. And then after Trump's victory, then the message is starting to come that, okay, for the main power of the West, now maybe Mr. Putin is not too much bad guy. Maybe he's even the good guy. And then we all started to understand that if US is leaving Europe or significantly decreasing its attention on Europe, then definitely there will be less or no US in the South Caucasus. And EU itself should prepare itself either to somehow face Russia alone or trying to come into terms with Russia. And definitely EU also cannot be too much strong in South Caucasus. Now, Armenia should adapt itself to the less West, more Russia South Caucasus. And because the time frame was too short, like 36 months in geopolitics or in history is nothing. But we went from one extreme that we should adapt itself to live in Russia-free South Caucasus. Now we are being told that, look, you South Caucasus will have less and less West, probably more and more Russia, and probably more and more Turkey. So sorry, guys, now you should adapt yourself for significantly more Russia, South Caucasus.
And who's telling that? You're saying we're being told. Who is the one doing that telling?
I think if you will speak with any serious Western expert, especially after November 5, 2024, the messaging is that, guys, because of this global turmoil and everyone declaring war against everyone, including US trade war against the EU, I don't know, US effort or threats to annex Greenland, which is a NATO territory of NATO member country, and even there are some just news now that US is pushing Alberta, the very significant Canadian province, to hold even independence referendum in 2026 and then join the United States. And Alberta is a main source of Canadian oil and gas. And probably when President Trump says that Canada should be part of the United States, I think mostly he cares about Canadian oil, gas, and maybe also like fresh water. I don't believe he cares about anything else. So in this complicated situation, and the key is that Russia is not losing in Ukraine. Russia very slowly but gradually since last 12 months, starting from early 2024, I would say even in last 15 months probably, Russia slowly but gradually moves forward. So the pillar of this assumption that Armenia should adapt itself to the Russia-free South Caucasus was the assessment that Russia is going to lose in Ukraine. If Russia is not going to lose in Ukraine, automatically this notion of Russia-free South Caucasus becomes science fiction. And under Trump administration, when America first and war against everyone, to think that US will have significantly put efforts in South Caucasus for what? at least under Biden administration, there was a perception, and Armenia was trying to portray itself, that Armenia is a weak but good democratic guy, encircled by very bad, strong authoritarian guys like Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, Russia. And the message was to the Biden administration that, dear Biden administration, you declared that the 21st century geopolitics is a fight between democracy and autocracy. And look, Armenia, weak but good guy Armenia, facing very bad autocratic gangsters. Please help us. And maybe this could have some logic behind this. That, okay, help Armenia. Why? Because Armenia is part of this global battle between democracy and autocrats. I think
So,
after January 20, any talk with President Trump that help Armenia because Armenia is fighting autocrats makes no sense. So, if coming back to this May 9 parade, from my perspective, this is a step towards readaptation of Armenia to the South Caucasus with more Russia and less West. But this is my understanding, my interpretation.
Let's turn our attention to Yerevan and let's talk about a brutal beating that happened not in secret, but inside a city office on public property, caught on video. Simply a journalist was beaten by a mob of men who, if not all of them, most of them work for the Yerevan government. Artur Chakhoyan is the name of the journalist, and he is known for exposing corruption, shoddy construction jobs in the capital. You know, you can frequently see roads that crumble days after being paved in his videos, kindergartens that look like they're from an apocalyptic movie scene, and this is all on taxpayers' dime. And one of the firms that he has targeted in exposing has ties to civil contract. And that same company, despite all these exposés by Chakhoyan, keeps winning contracts by the Yerevan city government, including the most recent one, which was like $2.5 million for a bus terminal, if I'm not mistaken. So essentially, after Chakhoyan posted about a failed kindergarten renovation in the Nornork district, he got a profanity-laced phone call from the district chief, Tigran Markaryan. And that was recorded, so it was, leaked to the media. And 2 days later, after that event, Chakhoyan walked into the district office. He was unfortunately carried back out, bruised and bloodied. Markaryan and several others beat him while the cameras were rolling, and that's also caught on camera. So, what did the police do? Of course, they arrested Chakhoyan. His charges, they opened charges against everyone, but his charges were the most severe, indicating jail time if he is convicted. Meanwhile, his attackers could go away with just fines based on the charges that were filed. Instead of outrage, the Republic Party, this is Ter Markaryan's party, rallied around him. One member even threatened violence if these types of provocations, their term for it, provocations continue. Others, and this is the most funny part, other members of the party, including the head, Aram Zaveni Sarkisyan, blamed the whole incident on Vladimir Putin, accusing Chakhoyan of being a Russian agent sent to stir trouble. This is the same party that is basically the junior partner for civil contract in Yerevan. It's a party that parades itself as a pro-European. They visited Bucha last year just to, score political points and provoke Russia even more. And they are pushing hard for Armenia to join the EU, even though no one in the EU is inviting Armenia. But when it comes to basic rule of law and so-called European values, apparently this party is too busy to waving EU flags and throwing punches to care about that. Benjamin, what is your reaction to this brazen criminal act by allies of civil contract, and how are such openly criminal events tolerated by the Armenian public?
Few assessments, probably brief assessments. Assessment number one, of course, this guy should have resigned immediately. And by the way, it does not mean that then it should not be any criminal prosecution. This should be a political resignation. And then, of course, law enforcement bodies should analyze who did what and why. And B, the fact that he didn't do that, and he was not forced by prime minister to do that, because at the end of the day, Armenia is like a very small country, and every important decisions made by one person, prime minister, and of course, prime minister understood that this is not good for his image, that people are being beaten by officials in front of many cameras. This also shows the weakening of civil contract. Because why? Let's not forget that just a few months ago, Prime Minister, only by sending some SMSs, forced resignation of ministers, and quite important ministers. As of now, he's not doing that. Why? Because another guy from Republic Party threatens that if this guy will force to resign or simply will be removed because he's not an elected official, and Mayor Tigran Aminyan may simply fire him by his personal decision. Another guy from this party warns that if Tigran Aminyan will fire him or he will be forced to resign, then the Republic Party will leave coalition, which automatically means snap elections in Yerevan. And I think the key reason is this, because Pashinyan understands that under current circumstances, it was very difficult for a civil contract to win Yerevan back in September 2023, and elections took place only 2 days before large-scale Azerbaijani offensive against Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. And Pashinyan understands that now it will be extremely difficult or almost impossible to win the Yerevan elections even through coalition, like to get the majority votes and then have coalition with any other partners. For me, the fact that Pashinyan, being himself as a populist leader, because from this perspective, this is an excellent opportunity to raise your images. You can immediately go to live and say that, okay, guys, this is impossible in this new Armenia. Because what is the rhetoric of government? Yes, starting from May 2018, we live in new Armenia, which is based on rule of law. This all like criminal attitudes, beating people, or this so-called Sifin law thinking, these are abolished in Armenia, or at least government is fighting against this type of mindset. And this was an excellent opportunity for him to exploit this, telling that, okay, this guy should resign immediately or should be fired immediately. And he could, on the live coverage, just take a phone call Tigran Aminyan and say, okay, I am ordering you to fire this guy because he violated the basic principles of the Velvet Revolution or whatever. And some people will say, okay, at least our prime minister is doing right things. But he didn't do that. Why? Because again, my understanding is that he is afraid that if there will be another snap elections in Yerevan and 1 year before parliamentary elections, civil contract may lose Yerevan, and Yerevan is 50% or even more of Armenia. So the fact that this guy, again, was not fired by mayor or was not forced to resign, for me, is an indicator the weakening position of civil contract.
Since you touched upon Yerevan elections or Pashinyan's popularity, I think we'll cover it in more detail, but I think it's worth mentioning that just yesterday, new MPG polls results were released, and these continue to indicate that civil contract is losing its popularity, and potentially we also see that the opposition is gaining some points. Can you talk about this in a very high-level fashion and how you see the new sort of alliances forming ahead of 2026 elections? It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this.
I think, first of all, it's clear to everyone that if there is no major shocks inside or outside Armenia, most probably civil contract is not able to form a one-party government after 2026 elections. So first, the only way for a current prime minister to continue to serve as a prime minister is to form a coalition. Like it will be like a civil contract and another junior partner in coalition, which will allow a prime minister to continue to serve as a prime minister. Observation number one. Observation number two is that also the opposition has chance to also challenge prime minister. Of course, it's also clear that no opposition force can take again 50% plus one vote. But if there will be an opposition party which can compete with civil contract, and also I think we all understand that incumbent, they usually have 25-30% minimum because of a lot of reasons, including administrative resources, etc., etc. So 25, 30%. If there will be any opposition alliance which can take, if not more than this 30%, but of course at least 25, 27%, and if the difference between number one and number two will be like less than 5% or no more than 5%, while in June 2021, I think the difference was almost 30%, yes? Civil contract was like 54 and Armenian alliance was like 22, approximately. So it was more than 30% difference. If in 2026 elections, even if civil contract is number one, but the difference between second, the biggest opposition alliance, will be number two, and the difference will be no more than 5%, then we may see also the few parties joining and establishing coalition while while preventing the civil contract or prime minister to be re-elected. I think the key here for such a scenario to work, I mean, opposition coalition takes power, not civil contract plus some junior coalition partners. The key is to have the leader or the number one in this alliance or party list, because it will be parliamentary elections. People will vote for parties, but we all know that in Armenia, there are almost no political parties and people don't like ideologies. They like persons. So in any case, even for parties, people mostly does not vote for or against civil contracts. They vote for or against Nikol Pashinyan, for example. I think key for the second scenario working, like any opposition alliance taking almost as votes as the civil contract, to have a leader, like the person on number one in this party list or alliance list, which will have as less anti-rating as possible. Because we know that there are some opposition leaders or perceived opposition leaders who may become leaders also in 2026, who have some supporters, but also many people don't like them. So there is a like positive rating, but also there is a negative rating. My understanding is that if people with significant negative rating, again, will lead this opposition alliance, which has the potential or has ambition to take almost as much votes as civil contract, most probably they will fail. But if there will be an opposition alliance, which will be led by a politician or by a person who has positive rating and significant less a negative rating or anti-rating, then there are chances that they might really challenge civil contract. Maybe they are not able to be number one, but they will be number two again with no more than 5% difference. And then we may see interesting developments of the elections.
Yeah, we'll take up the poll and upcoming election topics in the coming weeks. This is going to be fairly interesting. And so, all right, let's wrap our topics here for right now. Let me ask each of you if there is any kind of thought you would like to share with our audience. Benjamin?
I believe that regardless whom you support or whom you like or do not like, there should be clear understanding that the violence in politics is unacceptable, because otherwise it may start from skirmishes and punching each other and may end in a much more dramatic way.
Wise words. Hovik, something you'd like to share?
On the same topic, and I'd like to address diplomats and international human rights employees listening to us, because we know that you do listen to us. So, this is your chance to show your ethical side and make a noise about this. It so happens that just 2 days before he was beaten, I was actually talking to Artur Chakhoyan and was trying to see if he would come on Groong to talk about his work. And it is really valuable work also, because unfortunately he seems to be the only one covering all these transgressions, all these like corruption or apparent corruption cases, because it's not proven, but buildings crumbling or roads crumbling just a day or two after being supposedly rebuilt, millions of dollars being wasted. And he seems to be the only one doing this valuable work, exposing. And if he's not protected, then this is a clear message to Pashinyan that he can continue doing violence and continue to rule Armenia by increasing use of his iron fist. In the 2021 elections, he had this steel hammer. It will be a steel axe, as the prop for his new 2026 elections. I think that's what it's going for in this case.
Okay. Benjamin, thank you for spending some time with us. Thank you for your insight. We will talk again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Okay, well, that was our Week in Review show recorded on May 6th, 2025. We've been talking with Dr. Benyamin Poghosyan, who is a senior fellow at APRI Armenia, a Yerevan-based think tank. He's also the chairman of the Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies.
Folks, please look for us on social media. You know where to find our links. But also please comment, like, and share our shows with your friends because that really helps us. And I want to thank, last week, I think we got one new Surge sponsor, so we really appreciate and want to thank them. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if we can, share everyone's names, but we really do appreciate everyone's contributions.
All right, folks, I'm Asbed Bedrosyan here in Los Angeles.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan, 2 blocks away from Asbed in Los Angeles.
Two guys in Glendale talking about Armenia.
Yes.
All right, we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.